So, a police officer who used to be one, this happened to him back in 2014. He got a call one night regarding a woman who had claimed that her boyfriend had been shot. Police arrived on scene to see that the boyfriend had been shot. He had been shot in the stomach, which of course the paramedics did try to heal him, but he was presumed dead on arrival. The police had investigated the scene, and it turns out that this woman, Min, pretty much had her house broken into, and the boyfriend was shot. It's profoundly sad that her boyfriend is dead, but it's this is one of the calls that police officers really had to deal with every day. This comes to show that they do try their best to save lives and make sure everybody is safe and happy every day. So, a friend of mine used to be a police officer back in 2017. I'm going to call her by the name Ada. Ada used to be a police officer since 2010, but she quit sometime in 2018 after a traumatic experience that she's ever had as an officer. Since that's a different story, I'm going to be talking about the one that she had experienced while working at a airport. She worked at the airport as a police officer somewhat, but of course it was her duty to be there in case if people were trying to smuggle drugs or even guns and illegal stuff. As Ida was still patrolling the area, she noticed that there was this one guy. He looked to be homeless, and he looked to be maybe about maybe nearly 7 feet tall. For some reason, he was quite suspicious to her, and he seemed to be alone as he didn't have his family or anybody with him. Of course, that's when Ida walks up to notice that there was something in his pockets that he was hiding. Of course, Ida decided to search his pockets to find out that there were drugs inside. Illegal drugs that he had planned to smuggle outside the country. She had examined his bag to find out that he had been planning to smuggle drugs and illegal stuff to another country. Of course, he was arrested, although he did try to put up quite a bit of a fight, but eventually accepted defeat. This comes to show that not everything is a Disney movie, but of course she had no idea what this man's intentions were, but they obviously weren't good, especially when he had the drugs with him. Ada had ever similar experiences like that while working at the airport as an officer, but of course, this one is definitely one of them that she wasn't expecting, but it was definitely other stories she had been through that are like that, but she never seen that man again after arresting him. She doesn't even know if this man got her released or not, but she certainly doesn't want to know if he's still out there or not. There is definitely a place in hell waiting for him, especially with him smuggling drugs on board. So, a police officer who I happen to have known for quite a little bit at the time was Officer Eric. Eric had been an officer for a while, and of course, one of his jobs was to keep everybody safe and make sure everyone in town was safe and stuff. However, there was one call out of town that he had gotten that was involving kids. Calls involving kids are usually the worst calls. He gets a call from a girl no older than 12 saying that her brother had drowned in the water and she had no idea how to save him. Of course, Officer Eric arrived and of course tries to go and save the boy by taking him out of the water. But unfortunately, he was not breathing. This is one of the jobs that he has done with involving kids, but some calls that he cannot ignore. he goes over to see that there was a boy no older than 9 still in the pool. He goes in there, dives in to save him, and tries to perform his CPR, but unfortunately he did not make it. He had unfortunately drowned. Of course, it was irresponsible of the parents that had both left their kids home alone, thinking that they can handle themselves. Now, this is definitely one of the calls that Eric had thoughts of quitting the job because of involved kids, but he decided not to quit his job and continue to go on with his career. It's just calls like this he really has hard times with dealing with, because when he gets calls involving kids, he always thinks about this one. This is definitely one story that he has experienced that involved kids, even though he really feels bad for that young boy. But he's not really so sure if the parents were ever fined or not, and clearly he didn't get any updates regarding the parents or whatever. As it turns out, the young boy fell into the pool and he couldn't swim after he dropped a doll in the pool. Of course, the young sister was looking for him, and of course she couldn't really find him until she found him in the pool, and that's when she dialed 911. Still to this day, Officer Eric would never forget this call that involved young kids, even young kids being home alone. He still even gets chills to this day knowing that those kids were alone without their parents. Was definitely terrifying, knowing that one of the kids had died. Now, this happened to an officer back a few years ago. I can't really remember, but of course this story has goes when of course some people were talking about it. There was this really old house that a group of teenagers used to play around in. They played around in the near the house, abandoned house, but of course a girl who happened to be their friend had somehow got lost in the woods. She was reported missing by the police, and the police started to look for her. They looked everywhere, but they couldn't find the girl until one officer decided to look a little further into this. The officer stumbled upon an old abandoned house with some canine and a search and rescue team arrived. They end up going inside the house to see if they could find the girl. What's really disturbing though was they found the girl dead. She was already dead and looked like she had been dead for at most a day or two. With all due respect with the police, the woman never survived, and it turned out that she had been brutally beaten by something. There was no evidence to tell who it was, but of course she was beaten. Probably maybe by an older man or woman, or maybe something beaten it. There was no really clue to tell. Of course, this abandoned house was in the middle of nowhere, so there wouldn't be anyone but one for miles to come to the house. This comes to show that police have even found more disturbing stuff when it came to stuff like this. From anything involving missing people is definitely one of the worst calls you could ever imagine. Police officers have gotten calls saying that their daughter was still in that house. But of course, they even broke the news saying that the daughter had died. It was not explained how, but there is definitely something within that house. But what's really disturbing though is that there was no traces of anyone living in the house. So there was no way anyone could live in there unless someone had lured the girl in there. There's not really sure or how it's explainable, but it's definitely one of the worst cases that of course that police officers ended up seeing, but they have seen anything much worse than this.